Hello everybody! This piece I'm working on today is a monster. It's probably one of the heaviest pieces that I've ever had to move around by myself, so this looks a little awkward. Don't worry, I had everything under control. This massive pine dresser was a piece I found on Marketplace, and the person I bought it from said that his friends threatened to never help him move again if he hadn't gotten rid of it by the next time he had to move. I immediately saw the potential in this. It needs some work, but you're not going to believe the results. At a distance, this piece doesn't look too bad. It might even look good, but you'll see in a minute once we get up close there are a lot of issues with this piece. And here we go. My name is Angie and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. Okay, so right off the bat, taking a look here up close, you can see there are so many scratches, marks, dings. It's pretty typical for pine. It's a very soft wood and not at all uncommon to see this kind of marking, especially on vintage pieces. What made this piece appealing to me are these side pieces here with this beautiful curve. I'm planning to leave those wood along with this piece, definitely the top, and adding two small shelves where the middle drawers were behind the door. And I'm even considering keeping the hardware. It's not the most modern, but I kind of like that it's got a slight patina to it, and with the finish that I'm planning for this piece, I think it's going to be perfect. So I'm going to hang on to these. I'll clean them up a little later on, but yes, I am going to be reusing the hardware. So behind this door is an area where there were at one point two small drawers. I'm told the drawers got damaged or lost a long time ago. They don't exist anymore. So what I'm going to be doing is removing the door, removing the drawer guides and everything else that goes along with that. And somehow, I don't really know yet at this point in the process how I'm going to add shelves in, but I'm going to do it. I couldn't figure out why this door wasn't coming off, but I looked in behind and there's a single screw left with the hinges, so I'm just going to remove that. Take the door off, remove all of the hinges and the rest of the hardware that goes along with the door. This little mini ratcheting screwdriver is the handiest thing for tight spaces like this where you can't get a full-size screwdriver in, or where it's awkward to use one of the little stubby screwdrivers. I find it especially useful for doing what I'm doing here, removing or even tightening wooden drawer slides. My plan at this point is to try to make a shelf out of a piece of laminated pine that I have left over from another project, and then use 1/4-inch plywood on the sides and the back of that piece to make a little box. We'll see how that goes shortly. But first, I need to strip and sand this piece, so here we go. I've had a few people ask why I use this little cup here, and it's specifically for parts like this where I might have drips. It doesn't catch all the drips as you can see, but it does catch a lot of them. The less of this stuff on my cement floor, the better. You may have noticed as well when I was pouring this particular stripper that it came out a little bit clumpy, and it's not that it's clumpy, it's just that this specific type is a little bit more of a gel. It's not quite as runny, and I really like it for vertical surfaces where you don't have to worry about the stripper just running right off. You can see it clings really well to the sides of this piece and does a great job because I find it doesn't evaporate quite as quickly. I've also had a few questions in the past about what I do with this goop once I strip it off, and you can see I have this disgusting looking bucket. And what I do is I scoop all of that into that. It eventually dries out, and when it dries out, it can just be tossed with the rest of the regular workroom garbage. You can't really toss it if it's still liquid because of how volatile the chemicals are, but once it's dry, it's basically just dried up finish. That's not a problem to toss, as long as you're not dealing with any lead-based finishes. I'm starting this off with a 180 grit sand pad. While this whole piece looks solid wood, it's actually not all solid wood. So the trim around the outside of the top is solid wood. This part that I'm sanding here in the middle, that is actually a pine veneer. It's fairly thick, but it's still a veneer, so I can't be too aggressive with the sanding, at least with this lower grit. The edges here, like I said, are solid wood. I can be a little bit more aggressive, and I can try to get some of those gouges out with this first sanding pad of 180. As far as the marks that are remaining on the top after the 180, I'm going to get those out with the 220. So having a look at the back here, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about because I realize it's a little bit confusing. So looking at the back here, the top piece looks like it's a single piece of solid pine, and the edges look like they're a single piece of solid pine. The edges are indeed, but the top is not. So if you look from the top, along the back here, you can see this very thin strip of pine. It's about 1 millimeter or so thick, and it runs the entire length of the back. That is edge banding, which suggests that this top is something other than solid wood. Now on the top you can also see splits along the length of it, which normally would suggest that they are solid pieces of wood glued together, but in this case I believe they are either strips of pine veneer, fairly thick veneer, or planks, but it's not one solid piece. I have no idea what the substrate is. I am not ripping this apart to have a look. It's most likely either pressboard or, even more likely, probably some sort of wood like poplar or some other species of wood. So looking at this now, I'm into the evening of the first day of work on this piece. I have the whole piece sanded with 180. The sides and any areas that will be painted have been scuff sanded. You can see on the top here there are still marks remaining. Those are going to come off when I do my 220 grit sanding. The drawer faces as well will be painted, so I'm giving those also a scuff sanding. I apologize in advance for the lighting in the next few clips. It is very strong end of the day sunlight and my camera was a little confused. This is still just a 180 grit. I don't want to go down to the bare wood. I just want to sort of rough up the surface a little bit so the paint adheres better. And I'm taking a damp cloth to just get rid of any of the remaining sanding dust and give it a little cleaning here before we paint. If you've seen several of my other videos, you know that these monotonous parts of the process I tend to speed up slightly. In this video, I am actually showing a lot of it in real time. Not all of it, but a lot of it. This piece took me nearly 3 full days to do start to finish, and it's really a testament to the amount of work that goes into this. I get asked all the time about doing custom work. I won't touch it because the expectation that it can be completed in a day for $100 in labor, never mind materials, is just so unrealistic. So this project was pretty much 3 full days to do, about 2.5 hours worth of actual footage to edit down into a 20-minute video, and I think sometimes there's a disconnect there with how long and how difficult sometimes these flips are. This is that piece of laminated pine that I had left over from another project that I mentioned. I want these to go from the back all the way up to the front, so I just marked them off. I'm giving them a cut. Don't worry, I am not going to cut my garbage bin. There's plenty of clearance there. I know someone's going to say something. Someday I'll hit the big time and get myself a table saw, but for now, the circular saw works just fine. These are the pieces now. I'm just giving them a 220 grit sanding to remove any splintering from the cuts. Making sure these fit in tightly. Like I said, I'm going to use some plywood to basically build a little box. So there'll be actual sides and a back to this. But for now, I'm just making sure that these fit and they seem to look good. These pieces are also going to be kept wood grain. They're going to be stained in a way, you'll see. Now, for the parts that I'm actually painting, I absolutely need to prime these. Pine is notorious for bleed through, especially on the knots. So I'm using a shellac-based spray primer. This does also come in a can that you can brush on or roll on. The spray is going to make quick work of this, so that's what I'm using. With pine, often one coat of primer is not going to cut it. So basically what I'm going to be doing is doing however many primer coats is necessary until the bleed through from the knots doesn't show through anymore, and then I can paint. I ended up doing 3 coats of primer. I have these drawers all butted up against each other to minimize overspray because I don't want to get any of this actually in the drawers, just on the drawers. And here's what I'm talking about. This is bleed through. All of these areas are where there are knots, and like I said, it is notorious for bleed through. Basically what it is tannins and sometimes pitch in the knots that just leach into the paint or primer, whatever you put there. If you notice any actual pitch, which is like the sap, you need to make sure that that's dried out before you paint because it will just keep coming out. I'm told acetone can help with that problem. So if you notice sap coming out, try some acetone, make sure it's dried out, then you can prime and then you can paint. You can see I've got this piece all taped up here anywhere that I don't want overspray, particularly on the sanded down wooden parts. I'd already sprayed a lot of this when I realized that I forgot to patch these holes where the hinges were, so I'm just using some Drydex to do that. Once that's dry, I'll sand it smooth and spray that as well. Of course, just like the drawers, there is bleed through on here as well, so I will definitely do another coat. After the second coat of primer, I decided to fill some of the small holes that were around. Some of them were staple holes, some of them were just normal wear and tear dings and marks. But I decided to fill those, sand them smooth, and then when I do my third coat of primer, that will cover those up. I didn't try to fill every single one, but I just wanted to give it a slightly better and smoother appearance. Now, don't judge me too much here. I'm doing the best I can with what I have to work with. This is basically the little box that I've made. There had to be a notch at the front of the side pieces because of a bar that's inside the dresser. But basically, I've got these 2 pieces on the side. There will be a back piece as well. And then this whole box is going to fit inside those little areas where the small drawers used to be. Pulling the painter's tape off here, you can see there's a slight little bit on the wood there. I'm not worried about that. I'm going to be painting first, and then if there's any little bits that get on the wood, I'm just going to sand that off before I stain the wood itself. I'm using a new color by Fusion Mineral Paint called Cashmere, and it's a beautiful neutral, and you can see against the bright white of the primer, it looks a little bit maybe like creamy, slightly sandy, beige-ish, but it actually reads as a beautiful off-white when it's dry. I chose this color for 2 reasons. Number 1, because I haven't tried it yet and I wanted to see how it stacked up against some of their other off-whites and neutrals. And also because of what I'm planning for the wood grain itself. I'm doing a two-step staining process on the wood. I'm going to be using pickled oak, which is basically a white pickling stain. I'm going to do one coat of that on the wood. Before it dries, I'm going to go in with Minwax Special Walnut, and it's not going to be dark. It's basically just going to slightly change the tone of the pine. And then once that's completely dry, then I'm going to go back in with one more layer of pickled oak. And I've never done this combination before, but I can see it in my head and I feel like it's going to be beautiful, so I'm going to give it a go. This is the second coat of Cashmere on the drawers. You can see how it actually looks a lot more like white than it did when it was going on against the bright white of the primer. It's funny how that works. Right, so here's Minwax Pickled Oak stain. So give it a good stir. I'm putting it on with a brush. I'm being as careful as possible not to flick this everywhere. It's quite watery and I don't really want this on my fresh paint. So I'm just working it into the wood. I'm making sure to get into that little crack there all the way around. Normally when applying pickled oak, you want to do 2 coats pretty much back to back. I'm doing things a little bit different, like I said, because I want to slightly change the color of the wood. It's going to be subtle, but it's what I see in my head, so I have to see it through just to see how this is going to look. My main reason for doing it, and this shot is actually a good example, you can see I've already pickled the top, and you see how it looks a little bit pink? I don't really want that pinky look. I want this to be a little bit more sandy or beige colored, so that's why I'm opting to do this special walnut on top of this. Honestly, don't be afraid to play around with stains. As long as you're mixing oil-based with oil-based or water-based with water-based, you can experiment in all sorts of ways. You can mix colors, you can layer colors to get more of what you're looking for, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. I've done it before, not this exact combination, but I like coming up with new stains and new paint colors, and you don't have to be limited by what a company has in its catalog. You can do your own thing. I'm doing the final coat of pickling stain here over top of the special walnut, which had completely dried in between, and you can see it is a very different color, and this is exactly what I wanted. As previously mentioned, I am reusing the hardware, but it does need a little cleaning and a scrub, so I'm using a non-abrasive scrub pad here and some degreaser. I could have used a metal polish to try to brighten these up. I didn't want to. I like the patina. It's exactly what I want for this piece. Now I do have to apologize here. I had an issue with one of my SD cards in my camera and it didn't film the part where I sealed this piece. So I'll explain what I did. I sealed all of the wood with Minwax Polycrylic in a satin sheen. I did 2 coats, and on the paint I used my favorite Beeswax hemp oil combo from Fusion. As far as the box goes that I used to make my little shelves, I basically glued it to the main shelf and drove some finish nails in there and then glued and nailed the whole piece inside the frame. I'm sorry I missed that in the footage. This piece took forever. It was so much work, but I am so happy with it. It's honestly probably one of my favorite pieces this year, and that's not an exaggeration. I'd say it's one of my favorites, both because I just love the colors and the whole vibe of the piece, but also the transformation factor of it. The fact that it looked like this, and now we're going to see what it looks like transcended. See what I did there?